As I have been a pastor for 40 years, and also as I have been a ministry relations officer for the Foundation of the Northwest, I have found that people that really display this principle draw people together around them, and these people activate hope because they live in an abundant life in Jesus Christ. The principle is the heliotropic principle, and it's a principle of leadership, and it's simple. Sunflowers exhibit this principle. On the sunrise, they begin their journey and end at sunset. They embody the heliotropic principle, where there is the greatest amount of energy. Living organisms gravitate to that living organism and that greatest amount of energy, whether it's positive or negative. And people who are living this heliotropic principle, I believe, look at life in a way that we're going to be talking about at the seminar. They have learned that what they have learned is as important as what they have earned. What they have learned is as important as what they have earned. And what they have learned is that they share that through their giving, their time, talent, and their treasure in that heliotropic way. And they understand something about money. This is what Lynn Twist writes about in terms of money. One of the things that Andrew and I talked about is the church really doesn't have a theology of money. When I became an ordinand, and when I went in front of Presbyterian, remember, Presbyterian can ask you anything in regards of theology. And so they did. They asked me about the theology of the two natures of Christ. They asked me about the church. They asked me about communion and baptism. But nobody asked me about the theology of money. Nor have I asked anybody that has come before the presbytery, what is your theology of money? Lynn Twist, who wrote a book called The Soul of Money, wrote this about money. It's not a theological book, but it has incredible theological principles. This is what she said. Money is like water. It can be a conduit for commitment, a currency of love. What do you have? Bring it to me. Money moving in the right direction of our highest commitments nourishes our world and ourselves. What you appreciate appreciates. When you make a difference with what you have, it expands. Collaboration creates prosperity. True abundance flows from enough, never from more. Money carries our intention. If we use it with integrity, then it carries integrity forward. Know the flow. Take responsibility for the way your money moves in the world. Let your soul inform your money, and your money express your soul. Access your assets, not only money, but also your own character and capabilities, your relationships, and your own non-money resources. Know the flow. Live in abundance and not scarcity. I struggle with that. Maybe you do too. When I struggle with that, I am like Chippy the parakeet. Now, I have to apologize to all the bird lovers out there, but I found this in U.S. News and World Report about 10 years ago, and when I live in scarcity, I feel like Chippy. Maybe you do too. Listen to the story. Chippy the parakeet never saw it coming. One second he was peacefully perched in his cage. The next he was sucked in, washed up, and blown over. The problem began when Chippy's owner decided to clean Chippy's cage with a vacuum cleaner. She removed the attachment from the end of the hose and stuck it in the cage. And the phone rang, and she turned to pick it up. She barely said hello, and whoosh, Chippy got sucked in. The bird owner gasped, put down the phone, turned off the vacuum, and opened the bag. And there was Chippy, still alive but stunned. Since the bird was covered with dust and soot, she grabbed him and raced to the bathroom, turned on the faucet, and held Chippy under the running water. And then, realizing that Chippy was soaked and shivering, she did what any compassionate bird owner would do. She reached for the hairdryer and blasted the pet with hot air. And poor Chippy never knew what hit him. A few days after the trauma, the reporter who initially written about the event contacted Chippy's owner to see how the bird was recovering. Well, she replied, Chippy doesn't sing much anymore. He just sits and stares. Sucked in, washed up, and blown over. Sometimes, do you feel like Chippy? Well, my money outlasts me, right? We start to worry and fret. And we live in scarcity rather than abundance. Lynn Twist said this also about abundance versus scarcity. No matter who we are, what our circumstances, we swim in conversations about what there isn't enough of. I see it in myself. For me and for many of us, our first waking thought of the day is, I didn't get enough sleep. The next one is, I don't have enough time. Whether true or not, that thought of not enough occurs to us automatically before we even think to question or examine it. We spend most of the hours and the days of our lives hearing and explaining, complaining, or worrying about what we don't have enough of. We don't have enough time. We don't have enough rest. We don't have enough exercise. We don't have enough work. We don't have enough profits. We don't have enough power. We don't have enough wilderness. We don't have enough weekends. And of course, we never have enough money, ever. We're not thin enough. We're not smart enough. We're not pretty enough, or fit enough, or educated, or successful enough, or rich enough, ever. Before we sit up in bed, before our feet touch the floor, we're already inadequate, already behind, already losing, already lacking something. And by the time we go to bed at night, our minds race with a litany of what we didn't get done or what we didn't do the next day. We go to sleep burdened by those thoughts and wake up to the reverie of lack. Sound familiar? Enter Jesus. What do you have? Give it to me. That was a great question that Andrew asked. What is hope? And this little girl said, hope is light in the darkness. That's all you need to know. She preached the sermon. Abundance versus scarcity, the joy of giving. A man named Jürgen Moltmann last century was the theologian of hope. And he said, hope is not wishful thinking. Wishful thinking is looking at a football team and saying, look at all those great behemoths that are the front line. We're going to have a great, great football season. They're going to guard the quarterback. That's wishful thinking sometimes. But that's not biblical hope. Biblical hope is always hoping in the midst of darkness. That sliver of light that Pastor Andrew talked about. I have Barrow, Alaska in my territory. How many have ever been to Barrow, Alaska? There you go, yeah. Do you know what's happening right now? Sun. Do you know what happened in November? Darkness. So the people work in darkness, they live in darkness, they worship in darkness, and they hope that one day, like it has all the other days that they have lived, that sliver of light will come up one day, and the next day it'll get brighter and brighter and brighter, and all of a sudden it's there. Hope in the midst of darkness. That's biblical hope. That's what Jesus does in deserted places. And if you are feeling that you are in a deserted place today, join the crowd. Biblical hope is coming and reframing that life that you have to say, Jesus Christ is asking me today, what do you have? Give it to me. And one of the things, as I mentioned in the reading of the text, compassion is so important. He has people eyes. He sees people. He doesn't have a myopic vision like the disciples, like the church sometimes. He sees people the way they are, and he wants to heal them, and he wants to touch them, and he wants to bring him into the grace that he just exudes. That word compassion we still use. In the medical community, it's called splegoma. It means the gut. Jesus hurt in his gut. The King James translates this, that Jesus hurt in his bowels because he saw people hurting. The heliotropic principle that I referred to at the beginning of the sermon, how people embody that. They also have people eyes. Every one of people who have given a legacy gift to the church, they don't do it because of tax write-offs. They do it because they have people eyes, whether it's a scholarship like you have, or maybe making sure that the building and the sacred place that they worship is making sure that they're put together and they're cared for. They have people eyes. And so Jesus turned to the church after the church said, look, these folks need to go to the Burger King and to the McDonald's that's closest to them, and they need to have something to eat. And he turns to them in the imperative mood and says, you give them something to eat. And the church said, what? We don't have the distribution service. We don't have the money. In fact, Philip in John calculated how much it would cost to feed this crowd. 9 months worth of wages. And Jesus said, bring what you have to me. What is it that you have? Bring it to me. He takes, he blesses it, he breaks it, and he gives it back. That's the order of grace. That's communion. You know why this story is in all 4 Gospels? That's a way that the biblical writers underline it and say, this is important. One, it shows Jesus to be king, but also it shows that communion is there by God's grace and by what we give to him and how he multiplies it. What do you have today? Bring it to him. Let him multiply what you have. And sometimes let him multiply what you don't have, and he will create it ex nihilo, like he did in the beginning of time. He will create something that you never thought that you could do. Bring it to him. And then you become the divine agent. He doesn't give it to the crowd. He gives it back to them. And they become the divine agent. They become the divine agent of activating hope. Ever heard of a time called COVID? You're just coming out of that. A lot of people are. We all had to stay home. I had to stay home. No traveling, no renting cars, no seeing pastors, no seeing churches like you and enjoying that relationship. I had to stay home. Drove me crazy. But then I said, I want to do something that I've never done before. It was on my bucket list, and I wanted to run a half marathon. And so I started to kind of train. And how many of you ever run a half marathon? All right, you know what it takes. It takes me about 12 weeks. Should have taken me 12 months, but it took me 12 weeks to train. And so I signed up for some marathons. I signed up for the Portland Half Marathon. About 5,000 other people were in, they got in corrals. I didn't know what a corral is, and I found out what a corral is. You're pacing. You had to be with other people that, were your same pace. And so I did that, and I was ready to go. And so the starter started his gun, and I started to run and run and run and run. And there were people that had signs all around the course. May the course be with you. I like that sign. Cowbells, they would ring cowbells, you know that, yeah. And so I started running around the 7th or 8th mile. I was running. I said, Hagan, what are you doing? Why are you doing this? And then it happened. I saw all these signs. We went through 5 neighborhoods, but one neighborhood and one 11-year-old girl about the age of one of my grandkids, my granddaughter, she was standing off. Nobody else was around her. And I was struggling. I was kind of in the midst of darkness, and I needed some light. And she had a sign that I'll never forget. And I read it, and I started to run. I started, yes, I can finish this. Now, you have to remember the 11-and-a-half-year-old culinary delights, what they like at that age in terms of food. And her sign said, "You're better than ketchup." Yeah, I could go to the finish line with that one. She didn't know that, but she was activating hope in my life in that race. Are you activating hope? Are you holding signs up for people to say, hey, what you have learned is as important as what you have earned? We're going to talk about that. Are you holding signs up that say, hey, live abundantly, not in scarcity? Let me finish with this. This is a powerful image of living in abundance and having people eyes. Someone told me about a camp that they were, a high school camp, that they were director of. And as everybody was coming in to register, these high school kids were so excited about the week. There's a van that pulled up, and a lot of kids got out of this van, but there were about 5 or 6 big, young men who got out, and they were kind of really buff, and they went back because this van had a lift, a handicap lift on the back, and they brought out this young woman. Her name was Debbie, in a wheelchair. She was a paraplegic, and so they lowered her on the ground. They were supposed to go to registration, but they didn't. They went on the dock, and this camp had a parasailing ministry. And so they hooked Debbie up to this parasail, and it was hooked to the boat. And they rushed her down the dock and catapulted her into the air. And she was giggling all the way, and she just flew around everywhere. And the staff was so impressed with these guys. Everything Debbie did, they did. And then Thursday, before the camp was over, the staff went to the high school kids, and they said, you guys have been absolutely amazing. Amazing. Thank you for your ministry. But in the last day, we have a pretty big hike. It's about a 3,200 elevation gain, 3,200 feet elevation gain. So we thought that when we went to after the paved part of the hike until we get to and then we got to the gravel, that maybe the staff could take her down, Debbie down, and she could shop and everything and not do the entire hike. And one of the high school kids said, that wasn't the deal. A year before, Debbie had lost the use of her legs through a driving accident. And she loved camp, and she was so depressed that she couldn't maybe get going and go to camp. And the high school folks said, Debbie, you're going to do everything we're going to do. So what they did is that they went into the dining room and they got a chair and they converted it into a backpack with straps. And so they put the chair on their backs, and Debbie is strapped to the chair, and each high school person took turns to take her to the summit. One person started 50 yards. The next person had 100 yards. Then maybe one of the brawny guys had 200 yards. And they packed Debbie up to the summit, and there wasn't a dry eye in that trekking group because they had people eyes. They weren't looking at scarcity. We can't do this. They were looking at abundance. So the question that I have for me and for you is, who are you carrying today? Who are you carrying? Who are you bringing hope to? And you do it so well as a church. I saw your ministry out in the narthex. You do it so well. Keep on doing it. But make sure you cultivate those people eyes and living in abundance and knowing that what you have learned is important as what you have earned as you share that with others in the name of Jesus.